Afternoon, this is Jeff Cope, urban horticulturalist, general manager of Homegrown Gardens in Corvallis, Oregon, board certified master arborist with the International Society of Arboriculture, and all around good guy. I'm here to talk today about methods of watering, and I was coaxed into having this as a class a few years back because the nursery staff told me that, surprisingly enough, a lot of people come in the nursery and really confused about how much water to give plants, especially new plants. And so they coaxed me into doing a class on watering methods. I've done this class teaching also with the master gardeners in different groups. And I'm going to condense it all down here, and hopefully I don't try to cram too much in too short a space. If I run out of time here, I might do a second video. And we're going to talk about methods of watering and why we water and how we can know we're getting enough water on our plants. And I'm standing in here in our annex in the store, and behind me is our drip irrigation components and some of our watering supplies over here, so they're kind of help me with some props. I've also have some plants, a few plants here just to talk about the difference in plants and how much water they need. Some plants we consider to be high water users, some are medium, some are low, and some are even very low. And so as you develop a watering schedule of plant, you need to understand, and that's going to be reflected in how often you water. The general principle of watering plants is whenever you water, you always water the same amount. It's the frequency that changes. And so that's a real important principle to grab. Looking for something here. Here it is. So back in my days in California, I was invited to be part of a committee. It's called the Woolco's Project. And it stands for Water Use Classification of Landscape Species. And they produced a booklet. It's called the Landscape Coefficient Method of Estimating How Much Water to apply to plants. It was a fun exercise. There were a lot of professionals all together and went through and looked at all the plants that were used in the trade, and we assigned water use classification to those, and then learned how to estimate how much water they used, and so we reapply it. And so again, the principle always is replacing water that's lost. In the Northwest, specifically here in the western part of Oregon, we get a lot of rain. In fact, we're inside filming this today because it's very wet outside. And this is April 20th of 2023. And so we get a lot of rain. Eventually the rain stops and we can count on at least 3 months of drought in the summer. A lot of the plants that we pick for our landscape and our gardens are not endemic to this region. They might be endemic to a region that is used to year-round water. So if we stop watering in the summer, or don't water in the summer after the rains, they're going to suffer and they're not going to perform to our standards that we want. A lot of people will then pick drought-resistant plants, and that's a great way to go. Native plants, but even with native plants and drought-resistant plants, you have to irrigate them during their establishment period, probably at least 2 or 3 years, and sometimes in a particularly dry year. Some years here we might stop getting rain in April, and so instead of a 3-month drought period, it might extend to 5. And if you don't do some supplemental irrigation during that time, you might lose those plants that you've planted and cherished and nurtured for many years. So you got to be prepared to give them supplemental water to keep them thriving and healthy. Even some native plants. So why is water important? Well, water is a primary constituent the plant needs in the process of photosynthesis. It's the solution where all these things take place. And if the water is not being provided to the plant, it can't photosynthesize, it can't do all the processes it needs to stay alive, and so it's going to suffer. And it's going to go into a point of permanent wilting and not recover. It's going to die. And so we irrigate, again, because we have a drought season, and we plant plants that need water to survive that summer. So the question is how much to water. One simple thing to remember is watering by depth. I carry this with me all the time, and it's a soil probe. And I can stick this in the soil, and I can determine by how moist that soil is, how deep that irrigation is getting. This is a smaller probe. I have a larger one that I carry as well. It's much taller, and I can go down much deeper, and I can determine down up to a foot on this if my irrigation is reaching that depth. When you're irrigating lawns, you want to go at least 6-inch depth. So let's say you turn your sprinklers on for 10 minutes, let it set for about 4 hours, and then test it. Stick a soil probe. If you don't have a soil probe, you might just take a spade, any kind of spade, and get some depth, and then determine how far that water is getting down. If you're only getting 3 inches after 15 minutes or 10 minutes on your sprinkler system on your lawn, you're going to have to run it for twice as long to get the depth on that. So minimum 6 inches. The frequency, that's another factor. If you're irrigating a shrub bed, you might be looking for 12 inches depth. And so the same thing, you test it down to 12 inches. Now, if these plants are drought-resistant plants or low water requiring plants like this lavender, lavenders don't take a lot of water. They can be happy with infrequent water because they're in the low water use category. And so you may only have to water this plant once every 2 weeks, once it's established, but you always water it the same amount down that full 12-inch depth. So that's one of the things you need to pay attention to. On the other hand, if you have a bed that you're growing lots of water-thirsty plants like hostas, I love hostas. We couldn't grow those in California to save our life, and I can grow them with impunity up here in the Northwest, so I love them. And fuchsias. These are hardy fuchsias that come back every year, but they're going to be in the high water use classification. So your frequency, instead of once every 2 weeks on a low water use plant, might be more like once a week on something like these. Your lawn, because it is shallower rooted, you may have to apply that water to that 6-inch depth several times in a week. One of the things that we look at is, where does the water go in the soil? Water leaves the soil in 3 ways. Number 1 is drainage. So you water, and water percolates down through the soil. Healthy soil is going to percolate really well. Unhealthy soil is going to back up and the water is going to puddle. Also, it leads through evaporation. So after an irrigation cycle, the sun comes up, rays beat down, and it evaporates. We all know what that is. There's a third way, and that is transpiration. You think of plants as a water pump. They've got the roots down in the soil. They're pumping water out of the soil, up through the plant, out into the leaves, and there's stomata, little openings on the bottom of the leaves, open up, and out of those openings go water in the form of a gas state. And so they're pumping it out. And so over time, that water in that soil, if you filled that soil up to 12 inches, every day you're losing a little bit. And now you've got to add water back to fill it back up to that 12 inches again. And the trick is to know how much water, how fast it leaves, to know how frequently to reapply it. I'm not going to get into all the details of that now, but there are ways to determine how often to irrigate depending how fast it depletes in the soil. We'll be doing a flyer here, a handout that you can download and come to the nursery and pick up that has some of those details on it if you're interested. Also, if you're interested, we will have up on the website a list of plants for the Pacific Northwest and how they're classified in high, medium, low, or very low water use requirements. And I'll admit to you that that list is not a committee, it's my own list. It's my data, my estimates of it, and so it's very similar to the one in California, except it's adapted to Western Oregon. So that will be available on our website. So what else do we need to cover here? So delivery. How do you get the water out there? Well, if you have sprinkler systems, that helps. Let's say your lawn. But you need to know what the precipitation rate of that system is. So if you know that you need to put out 1.5 inches of water in the course of a week when summer hits, how long do you leave it on? If its precipitation rate is 1/3 of an inch an hour, then you're going to have to run it for, 5 hours. If it's 3 inches an hour, well, it's going to be more like half an hour. So you need to know that delivery system. So you need to run a test to figure out what the precipitation rate is. If you're running a sprinkler on a hose, and my favorite are the oscillating sprinklers, because it's a gentle flow and they get a wide path and you can adjust these, all kinds of cool patterns. You need to put this out, take some tuna fish cans or cat food cans, set them out intervals let it run for 15 minutes and measure and see how many inches per hour it runs. And you can use that information to know how long to run it to get down the depth of water that you want. And again, we'll put that in the flyers, that information to help you with that. So delivery systems, these things work great. There's lots of different kinds. This is an oscillating sprinkler, impact, the old-fashioned rainbirds that we're all familiar with. If you like that sound that they go, it's fun to listen to. These are quiet. So there are all kinds of delivery systems, but what I do try to talk you out of is hand watering. It's therapeutic to go out and water in the garden, feel like you're really accomplishing something. But after about 20 minutes, you might kind of grow weary. You've got your fix for the day of your contemplative activity, watering by hand. But you may only be watering down just a few inches or even less. And so you've got to get that depth. So again, you can test it. So having something on a hose or a delivery system is highly recommended. You can also help yourself, because if you're like me, I've turned the sprinklers on in the yard to give it a water and forgot. I did that in California once. I let it go to the next day, and you can imagine what that'll do to your water bill. And so you can apply certain kinds of timers that you can put on there. These are big Bluetooth timers, and there's different kinds here that are battery operated or solar operated, and you can program that to run the days and hours that you want to run it specifically. There's also this kind of timer. And I use these at my place as well. You hook these up to a hose and you dial in up to 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45, all the way up to 2 hours. You can dial it in and it counts down and shuts off. So if you're like me and forget to turn it off, this will do it for you. Save you a lot of headaches to have these on your sprinklers. So I think I've covered kind of the basics of that, the types of plants. Again, we can get that on our website that are different water use classification, the soil depths. If you're irrigating some trees, and there are a few trees that we plant in our yards that even once established benefit by a deep summer soak. And if you want to try to get down a good 24 inches, particularly if you're trying to grow birches and a few things that are water thirsty, alders and a few things like that, you need to take that into consideration to keep them healthy. You keep your plants in stress, they're more subject to other disease and insect problems. So you want to keep them hydrated and healthy, just like our own bodies. I think I've covered all the key points that I wanted to cover, and we're going to have another session, another YouTube session here on designing and working with drip irrigation, all the components behind me here. And that's a whole session unto itself. So if you're interested in drip irrigation, how to design it, how to install it, we'll do a real kind of a quick course in that. And we have materials here, little booklets and things you can come to the nursery and get, and we'll help you design your system. So that's all for today. See you next time.